And the jurors got the real information, and the jurors made the real decision. Kudos to the jurors. The jurors had to sit up there and hear the pressure from this mob with their loudspeaker. The court case is right up there, guys. It's through that one pane of glass. These guys are down here with their loudspeakers. And the jurors must know that they risk their town having a riot if they say innocent. And they got past that pressure and came to the truth of the matter. Free Kyle. Right on, Kyle. You earned this today.
Again, what's your name, sir?
Brandon.
Brandon. Last name, sir?
Lesko.
Lesko, L-E-S-K-O? C-O. What's your name?
So that's some of the message that you could hear out here on the courthouse steps. You can see it's very crowded with media and people who have some reaction to this verdict. That group over there is Rainbow Push, and mostly you're looking at reporters who are trying to get inside here. As I said, there was a little bit of celebration on the street with cars honking their horns, but the people who have been out here every day have been voicing their support for Kyle Rittenhouse or their support for a guilty verdict. Now we know, not guilty on all counts. Now back to you.
Joni, as we've been watching you out there, you talk about who's surrounding you, but it does appear right now the majority of people out there are the media. Have you heard anything about any plans when it comes to making sure that courthouse is safe? Do you see more people coming out? I'm sure in the next hour or so we are in fact going to see more people coming out, not only there but elsewhere.
The emotions run high out here. They have every day. And it has been mostly media out here. But those who do show up to demonstrate and to protest feel strongly, and they speak loudly. As that person you just heard say, apparently the jury inside could hear the noise that was happening out here. They understood that this was an emotional issue. And so we also know that the governor has 500 National Guard troops on standby in case things get out of hand. Right now it is peaceful, and as you said, it's mostly media just trying to get reaction from people. All these people here are media, and there are two sides. On the left side you have the Rainbow Push Coalition, and on this right side you have this man holding this Free Kyle sign. That's all we have right here. Back to you.
Interesting, Joni, that you guys were told you were going to get that hour warning, and it didn't happen. I'm going to let you go do your job because I know you have people that you need to talk to. So let's go back to Larry Ellen, our legal analyst. We've been talking to Larry. Larry, you saw Joni out there, lots of emotions. Some people with the Rainbow Push Coalition talking about the fact that this was an unfair decision. As an attorney and someone who has watched this trial very closely, do you feel like, obviously, there should not be emotions when it comes to a final verdict? Do you feel like, in this case, watching everything, that the jury came to the right decision?
Well, let me borrow a line from one of my old law school professors many, many years ago who told us that the jury never gets it wrong. I don't have that much confidence in juries, but I think this case came down to two very different views of the defendant and which one you believe. On the one hand, the prosecution was suggesting, and a lot of people believe, that this guy should be punished, that Rittenhouse should be punished in some form for living in Antioch, getting a rifle, going across state lines, or he got it after he crossed state lines, going to Wisconsin. 17-year-old should have been home, shouldn't have been involved that night. And once he got there, was in the middle of a crowd carrying an AR-15, and there should be, and whatever happened after that, certainly he contributed to, and certainly there should be some punishment for that. That's part of the prosecution's theory here. The defense, however, was saying you can't look at that whole big picture. You can consider the fact that he's 17, but they said, let's look at the three separate instances where shots were fired and base your decision only on those seconds and whether or not he was defending himself in that situation, and ignore the fact that he was from Antioch, ignore the fact that he crossed state lines, ignore the fact that he possibly should not have been in possession of a rifle, and that as a 17-year-old, he should have been home in bed that night and not out there on the streets anyway. But it appears that the jury went along with the defense theory here that you have to look at what happened in those 4 or 5 brief seconds of each incident and look at the chaos that was on the streets that he was in the middle of. And the jury believed that he had a right to defend himself, even using deadly force to do so.
Let's talk about what difference did the video make? Because at one point, the jury asked to see video again, and a lot was made near the end by the defense that they had new and fresh video that they didn't have access to before. And they wanted to declare a mistrial to be able to use that. Well, it turns out that's not going to be necessary, and that wasn't the case. But how much of a difference did that video make in all of this?
Well, as much as the video may have helped the prosecution in suggesting that possibly Rittenhouse was not personally threatened on the scene that night, and there was no evidence that, for example, Rosenbaum had shouted at him and said, "If I catch you, I'm going to kill you." As much as it helped the prosecution, it may have helped the defense in showing all of the chaos that was going out on the street, going on that when Rittenhouse was on the street at that time. And there were probably several jurors, if not most of them, who thought in the middle of all that chaos, you have a young man who made a terrible decision, showed poor judgment, should not have been there, should not have had the rifle, but they didn't blame him for opening fire in the middle of all that chaos. I have always believed that when the video is crystal clear, it certainly makes it is the most important factor in the case. But where you had all this video and none of it may have been crystal clear, then you look at the second most important factor, and that's when the defendant takes the stand. And in this case, he took a chance. He took the witness stand. Most observers felt Rittenhouse held up very well under questioning, under cross-examination. He broke down and cried. Some people thought it was an act. Apparently, the jury did not. And when the video is not that clear and just shows a lot of chaos, it might have been his testimony that turned the tide in his favor. It was a risk, but apparently it paid off.
Right after the verdict came down, the judge did go out of his way to let the jurors know you do not have to talk to anybody if you don't want to, but if you want to talk to anyone, including the media, that is your option, that is a right that you have to make that discussion. So now, after we all wait to see if and when the jury will in fact be willing to come up to us and tell us why they came to their decision. I'm curious though, in high-profile cases like this, an MSNBC crew faced some serious charges after following the jury after they were let out yesterday after deliberations. What's happening with the jury right now as we speak, as far as you know from your experience?
Well, typically the judge will go in and have a few words with the jury and thank them for their work and see if they had any questions. And he'll poll them and say, are there any of you who feel comfortable talking to the media? If you do, we can set up a room here in the courthouse and get it taken care of right now. And he might advise them that if you take care of it now and you hold a little press conference and you answer a half hour's worth of questions, then you will not likely have the media hounding you in the days and weeks ahead. And as a former member of the media, I know hounding might be a strong word, but there certainly will be pressure if none of them talk today. If they all say we don't want to talk, there will be pressure from the media showing up at people's homes, knocking on their doors, sending them flowers, trying to get them on the Today Show, trying to get them on Fox Thing in the morning. There will be pressure placed on these jurors to talk if they don't do so today. So when they think about that, some of them say, you know what, let's do it today and get it over with. Yeah. As to the case of the MSNBC individual, the freelancer hired by MSNBC, who was apparently following the jury bus the other night, that sort of thing happens in these high-profile trials. If NBC wanted to follow the bus, they should have hired a helicopter, the way that stations followed R. Kelly around Chicago, used his black bus using a helicopter. But those things happen in cases like these. There's pressures placed on reporters to go get interviews with these people. I'm sure this individual was just trying to get some locations or license plates where he could reach out to the jurors after the trial, but he crossed the line and got too close to them.
Been watching live video as you're talking, Larry, one of the family members of the people involved in the Rittenhouse shooting being escorted out by police, or at least escorted to another area where she may likely speak. But I'm curious, what do you think, if in fact there was one, what might have been the turning point during this trial? Was it his testimony? Because a lot of people were surprised that he testified.
I always think when a defendant takes the stand in a trial, whether it was Rod Blagojevich, whether it was Jason Van Dyke, I always think that's the turning point. and whether or not the jury believes them. If they walk away from their appearance on the witness stand with some credibility, and the juries believe them, then I always think that's the turning point in the case, and I think it was here also.
Okay,
and
so
plus the grooming job that had been done, the fact that he didn't appear the way he did that night with the AR-15 hanging around his neck. He appeared very dignified, quiet, self-assured, kind of angelic with his puffy cheeks.
Yeah.
And I think that's was very influential for the jury.
I want to go back to the, I had to interrupt you earlier when we had to go back live out there. I want to go back to the issue regarding the gun and crossing state lines. You were starting to talk about why that didn't become an issue in this.
Well, as I listened to the court that day, my understanding was that a juvenile in possession of a gun in Wisconsin, somebody under the age of 18 in possession of a rifle, it turns on whether or not it's considered a dangerous weapon, and not all rifles, including an AR-15, are considered dangerous weapons. It depends upon the length of the barrel. And if the barrel has been shortened or something's been converted into a sawed-off shotgun, then it's considered a dangerous weapon. And the prosecution in this case presented no evidence to suggest that this was anything more than a standard AR-15. And in Wisconsin, those are used for hunting. Juveniles possess them, and they're not considered dangerous weapons.
And let's talk about that too, because you have to wonder if this case is going to set any precedent when it comes to gun ownership, when it comes to vigilantism, as a result, because the nation has been watching, and in some cases, many parts of the world has been watching. Do you think that this is going to have an impact on future cases or future laws that lawmakers are now going to try to pass? Because the bottom line is 2 men were fatally shot and 1 was wounded.
Well, I think it's too early to tell. It'll take a while for this verdict to set in. Sometimes when verdicts come down, people think that they're world-changing events, and then later on you look back 5 years later and very little has changed. I think of the Sandy Point shootings, when after the Sandy Point, when the children were massacred in a school, everybody thought at that point gun control nationwide would become standard practice, and there would be tougher gun control laws around the country. And yet years later, a lot of the laws have not changed at all. So I think it's too soon to tell. I think there will be an increased focus on vigilantes, but the jury has found apparently that Rittenhouse should not be placed in that category, that he was someone who was acting in self-defense. And the self-defense theories go back a lot further than some of these more recent laws. And it's been pretty clear for years that you can use deadly force to protect yourself if you believe your life is threatened. And in that case, that's what the jury believed.
Larry, we have just been told the city of Chicago has released a statement saying that police have been given a heads up and they are aware of this verdict. You know what that means, Larry. What do you suppose is happening now in the city of Chicago after this?
Again, we'll find out within the next few hours. I would imagine there will be protests organized, if not tonight, within the next few days. I remember after the Laquan McDonald video tape was released, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, became a huge day on the Magnificent Mile, with thousands of people turning out to protest. Maybe there will be some organized protests like that in the days ahead. There will be a stepped up police presence. You know, I also go back to the Jason Van Dyke trial, and after the Laquan McDonald video was released, and while there were massive protests after the video was released, there was not a continuing, after the verdict and Van Dyke was found guilty of second-degree murder, there was not continued, there were not huge protests at that point. Mm-hmm. You can hear my dog barking.
I was just going to say.
Sylvia, I apologize. She always gets excited when there's a verdict.
She wants your attention. That's all there is to it. You know,
give me 30 seconds to take care of her, and I'll be right back.
You got 30 seconds.
Okay.
You got 30 seconds.
Okay.
We'll come back to you in just a bit, Larry. Okay, let's head back out to Joni, who is live out there by the courthouse for us. Joni.
Sylvia, we're at the back parking lot where the sheriff's police just escorted the family of Anthony Huber to their car. They didn't say anything. They didn't make any comments as they were pushing through the crowd to try to get to their vehicles. They had talked earlier about how they needed justice in this case, but today they are just being escorted off and allowed to leave. We had heard that the families were summoned to the courthouse for this reading of the verdict. There's been no reaction from them. Now back to you.
Joni, if I can ask you, because you were in the middle of all of what was going on earlier, and I find it interesting that you were told you guys would be given an hour's warning, at least a heads up as to what was happening. Has that happened before during a trial where you're told, we're going to warn you, and then boom, there it is, the verdict?
Most all the trials I've covered are, in Illinois, and the courts there, and usually we are given time to assemble. But I will say that we're all already here, and the judge and the court was probably aware of that. It was a surprise to us, though we were getting information about the verdict from sources outside of the courthouse. We were able to be ready for this, and then outside the courthouse, some of the protesters who were also waiting for this news didn't hear it until a couple of minutes after we did. So it was really surprising, but we are here and able to bring some of this reaction back to you. You can see this is the family. They're going to take off now, and we're hoping to hear some reaction after this from some of the people once they can digest it. Now back to you.
Yeah, one of the instructions that the judge had given to the jurors was that they didn't have to talk to anybody if they didn't want to, but if they did, then they had that option, that they would be free and able to talk to the media. Larry mentioned that oftentimes what will happen is the judge will also tell them, it's Friday, the weekend's coming. If you want to hold a mini news conference, then the likelihood of you having to be hounded by the media over the weekend is less. So I'm sure that's something that you guys are waiting for to hear if in fact the jury will be available to you.
And quite often they make accommodations for that. A lot of times jurors want to make public what happened, what their thinking process was, so the public can know why they came to this decision. We haven't heard anything about accommodations for that either. And so if there are juror members who are willing to talk, perhaps the court will let us know later, but usually they give them a space that is private and secure so that they can talk freely.
Okay, thanks, Joni. We're going to keep you on standby. Right now, we want to go live to our sister station, WITI's coverage from Milwaukee. Of course, they're outside of the Kenosha building, and let's go live and listen in.
Resolve. It's not. You are hearing, I believe, someone talking on a loudspeaker right now. I believe that would be those who are with the Jacob Blake family. But as far as mood, again, it's more so of a, I think, culmination. And I think there maybe was just kind of a sigh of maybe relief. There wasn't any joyous cheering or clapping or sobbing, regardless of which way you may come down on this. It's kind of just watching and seeing how people are reacting to this and calm.
So we've just dipped in real quick to listen to what our sister station has been saying about what's going on right now. We're going to go back to Larry. Larry, hopefully your dog got a little break there and you're available to talk to us now. Okay, so people have been watching this trial for 3 weeks. There's been a lot of tension building up. There's a lot of anger. The racial issue has come up many times, even though the people involved were not people of color. And all of a sudden, the verdict comes in. He is found not guilty on all 5 counts. And for people who are emotionally invested in this, it's hard for them to believe it's over. Is it all over?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, there's likely to be some civil suits. There's likely to be, there's possibly a federal investigation that could be opened, although I think it's unlikely when a jury has made a finding like this. But Sylvia, maybe in the bigger picture, we're talking about the issue of restrictions on protests in the future. I think that we need to have a serious discussion as to whether or not mixing rifles with protesters is a good idea. Mm-hmm. And that gets into the issue of vigilantism.
Right.
There have been, I talked about that protest on Black Friday several years ago after the Laquan McDonald video was released. And it was a large, peaceful protest down the Magnificent Mile. And as I recall, there wasn't anyone carrying AR-15s or feeling obligated to protect property in that situation. And I also go back to the Democratic Convention that was held in Chicago in the late 1990s. And although I wouldn't like to see restrictions like this placed on protesters, when the convention was held at the United Center, there were designated protest areas. And in those protest areas, which were fenced in, people held signs and chanted. And maybe that's what we're headed for here. There has to be some form of separation, I would imagine, where you have angry protesters and people with rifles.
Larry, I'm going to interrupt you again. We want to go back out live to the courthouse, so let's see what's happening out there right now.
Will not necessarily influence all people, but this jury was able to stand up against the media onslaught of lies against Kyle Rittenhouse, the president and the vice president and everyone else's lies about Kyle Rittenhouse. Listen to the evidence and apply the law as instructed by the court and come out with a correct verdict. I think it's a great day for America. It's a great day for individual liberty.
You are running for U.S. Senate in Missouri. What type of impact does this have on your campaign, and why are you out here in Wisconsin? I'm out here in Wisconsin to uphold the Second Amendment, to support Kyle Rittenhouse, and to basically to highlight what happens when the government abdicates its duty to defend its honest citizens against mob action. This whole situation, Kyle Rittenhouse wouldn't have had to do what he did if the local authorities had prevented rather than standing back and permitting the mob action that he was trying to help. So it's Mark Stone from Sky News. Can you just give us your reaction to what the verdict?
Well, I think it's a great day for America. I think it's a great day for individual liberty. I came out here this week to support Kyle Rittenhouse and to support the individual's God-given right to defend themselves. And primarily that when the government abdicates its duty to defend its citizens against the mob, citizens have the right to defend themselves.
What about those who don't understand how a 17-year-old can walk the streets of a city with a semi-automatic weapon, shoot 2 people dead, and walk free? Just explain that one for us.
Well, we have a Second Amendment in the United States that says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The weapons charge against him was dropped. It should never have been brought. And he was defending himself against people that wished him harm. And that's what the Second Amendment is there for. The Second Amendment has 2 things: to keep and bear arms. To keep arms means to own them. To bear arms means to have them on your person when you're most likely to need them. That means when you're subject to attack, when you're out in public subject to danger, and that's why those 2 different phrases exist: to keep and bear arms. Because if you can't bear them in public when it's necessary to defend yourself, having them back home locked in a vault doesn't do you a whole lot of good.
What precedent does this set?
Well, I think it sets a precedent that the Second Amendment's alive and well, that Americans and human beings have a God-given right to defend themselves.
You might remember his face. He is half of that St. Louis couple who had gained notoriety for waving guns at the racial justice protesters last summer. You heard a reporter ask him, "Why are you here?" And he said basically that he was there to support Kyle Rittenhouse, and he called this a great day for America, for individual liberty, and to support an individual's right to defend themselves. So we're looking at live pictures right now outside that courthouse. Larry is still standing by. Larry, this case is just filled with emotion, and all we can do now is wait and see what's going to happen next. Chicago this weekend is going to be busy. It's the kickoff season to the holidays. We have the tree lighting, we have the Chris Kindle Market. Tomorrow night is the lighting ceremony, which is a huge deal, as you know, on Michigan Avenue. The city has got to be really doubling up today.
I would imagine that efforts and planning has been underway for some time. We know that for events like this. And with the advance warning they received today, I know we learned that about a half hour before everybody else learned of a verdict. It sounds like the city of Chicago knew about it. There will be an increased police presence. And if there are protests, the city officials are certainly hoping they will be peaceful and not turn violent.
Yeah, and as we wait to see if, in fact, the jury will actually speak this afternoon, what's the likelihood, you think, that Rittenhouse and his mother, who has already spoken to the media, will actually come out and talk about this?
Well, Rittenhouse, if you remember, and you might want to cue up the video again because it's pretty amazing, he collapsed when the verdict was being read. And when he realized he was found not guilty on all charges. So I'm not sure, it may be a while before he's ready to address the public. He may have some advisors who are telling him and his family, you know what, lay low for a while. Don't do or say anything that could instigate some violence. You're a very fortunate kid. You not only got away with your life on the night of those protests, but you've now been found not guilty of killing 2 people and injuring a 3rd person. And it might be advisable for him to lay low. On the other hand, he will be approached by journalists from all over the country, all over the world, who will certainly hang out in Antioch trying to get him and his wife to say something. And there will be a lot of pressure to do so, and maybe they relieve some of that pressure by giving a short statement today.
Okay, Larry, stand by again. We have Dane Plaka, who's also been covering this trial for us. Dane is out there live in front of the courthouse. Dane, what can you tell us about what you're experiencing right now and what you've seen today?
Yeah, I'm on the front steps of the courthouse. I frankly just arrived here. I was taking over the night side duty on this story, and the verdict was called as I was driving up here from the Chicago area. I thought perhaps I would have some trouble getting close to the courthouse, that some of the roads around here might have been blocked off by police. That wasn't the case. In fact, there was not a very large police presence initially. Now there is right here at the courthouse, as you can see. Let's take a look around here. There's actually, I have to be honest with you, there's probably more media here right now than there are protesters, for one side or the other. Hundreds of media out in front of the courthouse and filling the streets and the boulevard in the middle of the street, right across from the courtyard, or the courthouse rather. But the protesters have been speaking from the steps of the courthouse. They've been moving about. There's a large group that just walked down the street a little bit. But it's been kind of a muted reaction out here so far. There's not been a lot of shouting. There's not been a lot of anger. I just talked to one woman who's a Kenosha resident who said she wasn't surprised by the verdict. She's more concerned about the potential outcome, and she doesn't want to see anything bad happen to her hometown. She's a little bit worried about what could happen later today, if other people are going to be coming into town. That was her message. She said she just wants people to stay where they are. Don't come to Kenosha, she says. They've already had enough interference, in her words, from outsiders, and she doesn't want to see any more of that. So that's the situation here on the front steps right now. We've been gathering some reaction from some of the people on either side of the issue out here. We're hoping, of course, to hear from some of the attorneys involved in the case. It's unclear whether they're going to be coming out through the front door here or a side exit. There does not appear to be a media staging room inside the courthouse that's been set up for them to do any kind of news conferences. So we'll just have to play it by ear as it unfolds this afternoon. Back to you.
Excuse me, Dane, if you can, kind of paint the picture of Kenosha, if you will, just for our viewers, because you're talking about right now the majority of people seem to be the media, and they're coming from all over the place. I mean, from national and across the country and the world. And the reality is, this is such a high-profile case at a time when our country has been dealing with so much civil unrest, and racism has been the forefront of the issue, which is why Operation Push has been there. It's definitely come up in every capacity in these high-profile cases like this, Ahmaud Arbery, and here we are in the small town of Kenosha. So paint for our viewers what that community is like.
Yeah, I've been here just a couple other times earlier in the week covering the trial, and I was here, of course, when the rioting actually happened in August of 2020. Just to let you know, the courthouse itself is like right on the edge. It's on the fringe of downtown. We're only a few blocks here from where some of that rioting occurred. When I was here on Tuesday and the jury was still deliberating, I walked just a couple blocks towards the lakefront in that direction, east of where we are right now, and talked to a number of business owners, and they were all a little bit on edge. They were keeping their businesses open at the time, but they were also, keeping a pace of the news and saying that if, in fact, when the verdict came down, they were likely going to close their doors. I've not yet had an opportunity to even go over there and check out what's happening in downtown Kenosha at this point. But certainly people are on edge. I did talk to a woman the other day who had lived in downtown Kenosha, had an apartment above one of the businesses for the past 10 years. She was carrying boxes of her stuff to her car. She said she is moving out, not just because of the Rittenhouse situation and the riots, but other crime that's been occurring in the downtown area. But she said she just doesn't feel safe here anymore. And this has always had a reputation as being a relatively safe city right on Lake Michigan. What else can I tell you about Kenosha? It's an interesting town. I worked in Milwaukee a number of years ago. There was an AMC plant here that employed 15,000 people. They closed back in the 1990s, and a lot of people thought that would be the death knell of Kenosha. In fact, it wasn't. It has remade itself with new industry, with new businesses, and it's been a thriving little town. I say little, it's actually a fairly good-sized city for Wisconsin. And they take a lot of pride, of course, in their community here. The woman I was telling you about before that I was speaking to said that she just feels frustrated that so much of what has happened here over the past couple of years has been brought about by people, in her view, who are coming from the outside with agendas, one side or the other, and creating the havoc that we've seen here play out. And she's hoping that doesn't happen. So far, I have to say, all very quiet, very peaceful here. Some helicopters up in the air. Again, the roads are still open. If you turn around, Mike, you can take a look. There's cars going down the street right in front of the courthouse there. One would have thought that the sheriffs might have shut down this area and prevented people from trying to get in or trying to get about. That is not the case right now. So they must be of the belief anyway that there is no imminent threat of any protests or any riots or anything like that of that sort developing here. So that's the situation right here. So I'm counting 1, 2, 3 helicopters in the air right now. And again, a fairly quiet, fairly muted reaction, getting the sense that a lot of people, even people that disagreed with what Rittenhouse did, were sort of expecting this. And so we'll have to see how it plays out as the afternoon and evening wear on.
Okay, Dane, we're going to keep you on standby as well. I know you're trying to put your story together. So let's go back out to Larry Ellen, our legal analyst, former Fox 32 reporter. Again, Larry, I want to talk about the makeup of the jury. A lot was made about that there was a white jury, and when they decided who was going to make a decision on the verdicts, that names were drawn. That really perplexed a lot of people, that Kyle Rittenhouse himself actually drew those names. How unusual was that, and what kind of a difference do you think this makeup of the jury played?
But Sylvia, I don't think it was an all-white jury. From the reports I've heard, and I wasn't in the courtroom, there were 11 whites and 1 person of color. And originally they start with 18. I think they originally started with 20, but they got it. There were 18 who actually heard the case. And then after they've heard the case, they allowed Rittenhouse to pull 6 names out, and those 6 people were held as the alternates. In case the deliberations went on for a while and one of the jurors became ill or something, they would have brought in one of the alternates. It's unusual in Wisconsin. Apparently, that's the way they do it. In Illinois, and the cases I've also seen at the federal building, they choose the alternates at the beginning of the case. They just don't know that they're alternates, and all 18 people sit there, but everybody knows who the alternates are at that point. They do it differently in Wisconsin. I don't think it contributed to the verdict, and I don't think there was anything particularly fishy about the way they allowed Rittenhouse to draw them out, except that it's unusual. I hadn't seen it done before.
So let's talk about the 5 counts, what could have happened if he was in fact found guilty. We're looking at the video again of when the announcement came, and Rittenhouse is collapsing there after finding out he's found not guilty on all 5 counts. Larry, stand by. We want to go back out to Joni again, who's live at the courthouse for us. Joni?
We're here with Jennifer Pierce Miller, a veteran who traveled from Arkansas for these proceedings. She was here every day. You had tears in your eyes earlier. What was your reaction to all this?
I'm sad. I'm just sad that bad acts don't get punished. You know, the justice system is supposed to work. I mean, I thought we were supposed to have one of the better ones in the world, and it's broken. And it makes me very sad. No matter what this court said today, that boy murdered 2 people. He murdered 2 people.
When you heard not guilty on all counts, what was your initial reaction? You said you weren't surprised by that.
I wasn't shocked. I'm sad. That's just despair. The justice system does not work equally, and the fascists are winning. And it's very disturbing to me.
You're a veteran who served this country. What about that point of view?
You know, the country I served is the shining city on the hill. They're bringing your tired hearted masses yearning to breathe free, where all men are created equal under the law. And I sacrificed my good health for the rest of my life in service of that. And that's not what I see now. And it breaks my heart, and it brings me rage.
Others have talked about their right to defend themselves in situations like that.
Yes. When you go to a place where violence is happening, armed with a weapon that has one purpose, just human killing, that's not a sport weapon, you're a willing combatant. Self-defense goes out the window. You don't get self-defense in war. He knew he was going to a violent place. 2 weeks before that, there's recording that the jury didn't get to hear of him standing outside a laundromat where people are inside doing their laundry. And he says, I wish I had my AR. I'd start firing rounds at them right now because they were black. And he says, we all know what he came there for. Now look, if he was at his house and people were trying to break in, it's a whole nother freaking ball game. If it was his parents' business, you know, where his livelihood came from, that's a whole nother ball game. But it wasn't. He had a mission. He wanted to do that.
You traveled all this way. Rainbow Push Coalition and others have encouraged people to protest peacefully. What do you plan to do?
I'm going to protest peacefully. I've never done anything else but protest peacefully. And I'm going to continue to do that. I will not be terrorized into staying home and not activating my voice. And that's what this is. It's domestic terrorism. And I won't succumb to it.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Pierce Miller. She says she's a veteran, traveled all the way from Arkansas for this trial and waiting for the verdict. There were a lot of visitors to Kenosha who felt very strongly about this, who wanted to react and witness this in person. Now back to you.
All right. Thank you, Joni. We have just received this statement on the Rittenhouse verdict from Anthony Huber's parents, and here it is. We are heartbroken and angry that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted in his criminal trial for the murder of our son, Anthony Huber. There was no justice today for Anthony or for Mr. Rittenhouse's other victims, Joseph Rosenbaum and Gage Grosskreutz. We did not attend the trial because we could not bear to sit in a courtroom and repeatedly watch videos of our son's murder, and because we have been subjected to many hurtful and nasty comments in the past year, but we watched the trial closely, hoping it would bring us closure. That did not happen. Today's verdict means there is no accountability for the person who murdered our son. Again, that is from the Huber family. And we have Larry standing by for us. Larry, Mark Richards, one of the defense attorneys, according to the New York Times, is saying that after Rittenhouse's acquittal, that he is relieved and he looks forward to getting on with his life, and having a jury of 12 people find him not guilty meant the world to him in practical and symbolic ways. We were starting to talk about that because this obviously is very significant, because there were 5 felony counts, found not guilty on all, and he faced the possibility of life in prison, did he not?
Right. In fact, it was for Anthony Huber's incident where Huber apparently went after him with a skateboard after Huber had seen the original shooting of Rosenbaum. And Huber's was the only incident where they charged intentional homicide, which is similar to first-degree murder. And intentional homicide in Wisconsin carries a sentence of mandatory life in prison. There were lesser charges in the Rosenbaum case. The charge was reckless homicide, which could carry up to 60 years. There are no minimums except for the mandatory life. There it's mandatory. But the reckless homicide would have carried 60 years, and the reckless endangerment for the Grosskreutz incident would have carried up to 12 and a half years. So there were some very severe penalties at stake here, and the jury is typically not aware of those sentences. And is not supposed to consider them in making their decision. There are some legal analysts. I was talking yesterday to a Chicago lawyer who's done this for a long time, Terry Sullivan, and Terry suggested that when those mistrial motions were made, the judge had never ruled on them. And he was suggesting that it's possible that the judge wanted to see what the verdicts were, and then if the judge, if there were guilty findings and the judge seriously disagreed with them, for example, if it was first-degree murder and the judge thought that that was way out of the ballpark, at that point, he rules on the mistrial motion and decides to throw out that verdict.
Okay,
judges also have the option of throwing out a verdict by using what's called a judgment notwithstanding the verdict, where the judge says, based on everything I saw in this trial, the jury's verdict makes absolutely no sense. So if there had been, for example, an intentional homicide finding and the judge disagreed strongly with it, he could have changed the jury's verdict. That didn't happen here, however. And we're all waiting to see what the jury says.
Yep,
but
Larry.
In cases like this, yeah, go ahead, Sylvia.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to interrupt for a second again as we're taking a live shot, looking at a live picture outside the courthouse, and that is where our Dane Placco is. So let's go back out to Dane right now. Dane?
Yeah, we've been talking to any number of people here in the crowd on the steps in front of the courthouse on both sides of the issue, and it's bumped into a gentleman who's an attorney, criminal defense attorney, you say. Your name is?
My name's Jeff, and the last name is Jared, Jared.
Where are you from, Jeff?
Seattle, Washington. Actually, Kirkland, across the lake from Seattle.
So how do you find yourself here in the middle of this trial right now?
Well, I'm a self-defense guy. I believe in self-defense. It's a 1,000-year-old right, and I feel it was vindicated today. I mean, young Kyle is my hero. But at the same time that I celebrate his acquittal, I think we should mourn the deaths of the two people who died and the third person that was injured. So in my right hand, I celebrate, but I also mourn a little bit.
You're talking to some of the people here, especially the people who live in Kenosha. They're concerned that this verdict is going to be a signal that people can do this sort of thing willy-nilly.
Can be vigilante. I understand that, but when the government fails us, I mean, I'm for limited government, but the very core purpose of government is to protect life and property. The government failed the people of Kenosha on August 24th and 25th of 2020. So I think people that came down with guns were heroes. They were filling in for the police who stood down. And I think that's what America's about, self-help. And I understand the fear that it could lead to wild-ass vigilantism, but I don't worry about that. I think if the government did its job, Kyle would not have had to come down.
All right. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Yeah, good talking to you. So again, we're right in front of the courthouse. More media here again right now than protesters on either side of the issue. We're hoping to hear from some of the attorneys involved in the case and some of the family members as well coming up this afternoon. Back to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Dane. Let's go back out to Joni, who's also in that area right now for us. Joni?
Sylvia, we're talking to a local person. Elizabeth is from Kenosha. When you went past me, you gave me a signal of celebration. You're happy about this?
Yes, I am. I'm a firm believer in the right to bear arms and self-defense, and I think that political reasons got so into this to where it was just all over the place. I mean, and then I've been driving by here every day, and, they've been standing outside every day. Normally in cases like when there's self-defense or this going on, it's not really like a big deal. You don't see people outside the courthouse. But with all the rioting that happened last time, and it was a lot. I mean, I was upset. The next day, I was like shooken up. I mean, I saw smoke coming out over from the big car place on Sheridan over there. The town, there was glass everywhere. There was just, it was destroyed. So
Is that what weighs into your opinion today? We were here when all this was going on, night after night.
Yes.
Vandalism and fires, and the community broken, a nice lakefront community here in Wisconsin. And you know people who are affected by this. Does that weigh into how you feel today?
Yes. I mean, I feel like the National Guard should have been here on day one, and it made people want to come out here and protect businesses and protect what was happening, because, I mean, $15 million worth of damage is a lot, and not everybody, their insurance covers this damage from rioting and arson and all this stuff. And I don't know, I feel really bad too for a lot of the businesses that still aren't open. And
what do you think is going to happen? Are you concerned about what might happen now?
I'm actually 50-50. I mean, there could be rioting again, but at the same time, I think maybe people be more careful, because people do have a right to self-defense, and I even know a lot of business owners are like, we're not going to take it this time. So I feel like it's 50-50. Who knows? We'll see at night.
How is the community doing these days?
Have
things come back?
Yes, really well. I feel like there's a lot still boarded up, even from a year ago. So I know there was like some stuff on the news, like, oh, people are boarding up. It was already boarded up. So the community's recovered, but this just kind of opens up old wounds. But I'm very happy with the verdict. So, I mean, I feel like I'm proud to be an American today, because it was self-defense, and we have a right to bear arms in Wisconsin. So.
Also a right to free speech, which was what was happening out here.
Exactly. And what's sad is it gets really violent, and people they have their beliefs and they stick to it, and there is no in between. There's such a divide in America right now, and it's really sad, but people should not be rioting. People should not be setting fires to buildings. And that whole night, I saw a year ago, an old man was laying outside of next door to the mattress store, unconscious, because his home was caught on fire. And after that, I just was like, enough's enough. Like, I got really upset watching that. So
Kenosha has been called a community of America. Mm-hmm. It's never had things like this happen to it. And so as a person from here, how do you feel about all that's developed?
Well, I've lived in Kenosha long enough. I'm actually from Chicago, but I lived here long enough. I went to high school here too. But Kenosha's developed, I think, in so many ways. I mean, it's a strong community. You'll know if you meet somebody in Kenosha, and then they know somebody who knows that somebody. Like, everybody's connected in some way. Anybody I meet, they know somebody I know. It's just, it's a large community, but it's pretty connected, you know? And this has just made it such a huge divide to where people are even, like, nervous about what's going to happen tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your opinion. It's nice meeting you too. I want to show you the street, because not a lot is happening. They haven't blocked the streets. We don't see a lot of police officers, and we don't see a lot of protests at the moment. Of course, that could all change as the day goes on. But it is good to hear from someone who is from the community, who is affected by what happened in August 2020. Now back to you.
Joni, can I ask you a question? The media is still staying around the courthouse right now. Tell me what you're expecting to happen next. Are you waiting for the attorneys to walk out? Are you waiting to see if the Rittenhouse family walks out? What do you suppose is happening next?
We are definitely waiting for the parties involved to exit this building. It's not known where they will be, or the jury. But yeah, we're just waiting to make sure that we get reaction from anyone who was affected by this or in participation of this. The court has not told us exactly how that's going to work, but we're standing by just in case.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joni, and we'll be coming back to you when that, in fact, does happen. Let's go back out to Larry. Larry, as we take a look at this case, it's interesting to hear Dane and Joni talking to some people who have been coming to the courthouse. One of them saying that Kyle Rittenhouse was a hero, and that this was basically saying that, you know, the self-defense, that's exactly what happened, and that they were looking at him as justifying what had happened because he was defending himself. So I'm curious, as you watch this case proceed, there was a lot of criticism towards what the prosecution was presenting, and also that the judge seemed to be favoring the defense in this case. Did you feel like the prosecution didn't present enough evidence? Was their case weak?
Well, let's start, Sylvia. I'm always a little reluctant to criticize a case where I haven't sat and watched the entire proceedings day after day after day, and even more so where I'm watching it on TV, as many of us were every day, instead of watching it in the courtroom, especially because I love being in the courtroom because there you can actually read the jury, and there's an atmosphere or a temperature in the courtroom that you can kind of sense which way a case is going, as opposed to watching it on TV from home. That being said, most of the analysts, and I watched a lot of the coverage and I watched a lot of the case myself, found that most of the judges' rulings tended to favor the defense. That's not that unusual. Judges can be, and this judge has a reputation for being tough in sentencing, but when the trial's actually underway, before any sentencing might happen, he leans toward the defense, and a lot of judges will do that. The prosecution's case here, I thought, as I watched it, I thought it was efficient. I thought they made good use of the videos. Some of their witnesses provided testimony that was more helpful to the defense, but sometimes it's better for the prosecution to present those witnesses than for the defense to do it as a surprise later on. So I thought the prosecution did a good job, and as I've said before, I thought this case turned on when the defendant took the stand himself, when Rittenhouse spent that day on the stand, faced some tough cross-examination, and held up fairly well. As to those who think Rittenhouse is a hero, the jury in this case did not issue any statement saying we find the defendant to be a hero. In fact, as we hear from them afterwards, there may be a number of jurors who say, we don't think he should have been out there that night. We don't think he should have had a rifle in that situation. He was fairly young to be in that sort of situation. But we do think he was legally defending himself when those protesters, in their mind, came after him and threatened him.
Yes, it was interesting to hear that one man say to Dane that Kyle Rittenhouse stepped in where law enforcement did not.
Yes, and you know, some of that came out during his cross-examination. Why were you there? Why not call the police? Why not call the fire department? Why did you have to show up on the scene that night with a rifle and try and defend a building where you had no ownership interest in that building? You don't live in Kenosha, even though your father lives in Kenosha. Why did you have to be here that night? But I think the jury focused more on the precise incidents with all three of the alleged victims and to what happened during that quick 15 or 20-second span when he felt his life was threatened and he therefore opened fire. And I think they bought the defense's line that that's what you have to look at, not why he was there or whether he should have been defending somebody else's building. Look at the chaos that was going on. Look at the 4 or 5 seconds. Look at what he said on the witness stand as to why he opened fire. And then ask yourself, was this legitimate self-defense? We heard a little bit about the self-defense theory from one of those people who was just interviewed. And you know, self-defense in Wisconsin does say that if you, in fact, provoke the incident, then you can't use self-defense as your theory. The jury will be told that if you provoked the incident, if you're the provocateur, then the self-defense theory does not work. So this jury apparently did not believe that by showing up with his rifle on the scene that night, he necessarily provoked what happened.
And that's so interesting that you bring it to that point, that they looked at this specifically, because at one point, this is a sound that you saw often from one of the prosecutors saying you can't claim self-defense when you've created the chaos.
Right, and that's provided under Wisconsin law. And this jury apparently felt that he did not create the chaos, that the 3 individuals he shot were threatening him. They must have believed his testimony that Joseph Rosenbaum had said at least twice that if I catch up with you, I'm going to kill you. And that then when Rosenbaum did catch up with him shortly after that, he could legitimately use self-defense and open fire. The same with Huber, who was swinging his skateboard at him. They felt in that case self-defense was legitimate, and also in the third incident where Grosskreutz was hurt. So self-defense worked in this case, and I think it worked because Kyle Rittenhouse was a very believable and credible witness on the stand.
Interesting, after seeing him take the witness stand, as we talked about earlier, that it was an unusual move, but you said you felt like it was very much a turning point in this case. You know, he's 18 years old. You and I are both parents. 18-year-olds, for people maybe who don't have kids, think, oh, he was an adult, he was grown up, but he still seemed very much to have this childhood presence to him, despite the fact that he appeared in Kenosha carrying that rifle. I think his testimony might have tugged at a lot of their heartstrings because of that.
Right, and the jurors are that's not involved in the instructions whether they should consider the defendant's appearance or his age. Typically, the age and his childhood and things like that would be brought up at sentencing. If he had been convicted, then the defense lawyers at his sentencing can say, this is a young man, he made a horrible mistake in judgment, he should not have been there that night, but he had a rough childhood or whatever. That's typically all comes in at sentencing. But because of his appearance, which was very different than it was the night of the incident, the jurors no doubt saw that and felt that. And he had that going for him throughout the entire trial. And, you know, the defendants do some great makeovers. I've been watching a lot of coverage of the Arbery trial, and the man who pulled the trigger in that case took the witness stand yesterday, and he looked like he could be a lawyer at a high-priced Chicago law firm. He did not look at all like he did on the night of the incident, when he was more unshaven, looked more like a troublemaker than he does when he appears at trial. But that happens all the time.
Sure,
and
that's all part of it.
In this case, I thought it helped the defendant a lot because of his age, his youth, and his appearance in the courtroom.
Okay, Larry, stand by again. We've been watching live video. We saw police officers coming onto the scene. It looks like people are now walking outside of the building. Let's head over to Joni once again to find out what she can tell us. Joni?
Well, we've been waiting to see if there would be an increased police presence here outside the courthouse, and we showed you that some Kenosha police have showed up to the courthouse. We have talked about how they haven't shut down traffic, even though that there are people out there who are trying to make their way around. But a big group of police officers just showed up to the courthouse, and it looks like they are over closer to where Larry is at the courthouse steps. They were assembling in a parking lot, and now we can see a squad car moving in to perhaps control the crowd, because people have been walking all over here, and other people are trying to drive through as well. So now we are seeing a bit of an increased police presence, and the crowd, which had dispersed, has now reformed at the front of the courthouse. I don't know if that means that somebody's going to be walking out or what, but that's what we are on standby for. Now back to you.
Yeah, we did see, it appeared at one point there were police officers coming out of there, and there were some people walking out, and we're not quite sure. But as you said, so we are waiting to see what's going to happen next. And Dane is also out there at the courthouse. Let's go back out to him to see what his vantage point is showing him. Dane?
Yeah, I can reflect what Joni was saying on the backside of the courthouse. Here on the front side, we are seeing an increased police presence. And I'll show you back there, there's a line of officers. The Kenosha Police Department, you can see the knitted hats they're wearing, have now formed a little bit of a blockade along the steps of the courthouse. There was a bit of a skirmish that broke out about a minute and a half ago. I couldn't see who was fighting, but the police swooped in and took control of the situation, and now they're kind of lined up shoulder to shoulder trying to block off access to that part of the steps. Although there's not a very heavy police presence here, I'll say. Mike, let's turn around and show they've just now blocked off the street here in front of the courthouse. That's the first time we've seen that since the verdict was read over an hour ago now. Some police cars, a police van have now blocked off the street right here in front. 56th Street and Sheridan is where that blockade is. As we were saying in some of our earlier reporting, I was surprised when I came in here about an hour and a half ago. I was able to drive right in. I had assumed once the verdict was read that they would be closing down some of the streets around here. They have not done that, but now they are blocking off the street directly in front of the courthouse. A larger police presence, both Kenosha Police Department and Kenosha County Sheriff's on hand here, probably because of that little skirmish that broke out on the courthouse steps. Again, I couldn't see who was fighting or what they were fighting about. But the situation is less tense right now. Still, again, as I've been saying through the afternoon, a lot more media here than protesters at this point. But of course, the concern, especially from Kenosha residents, is that the protesters are going to be heading to Kenosha at some point now that the here a little bit. Let me show you something real quickly I just noticed. It looks like they may be trying to open up a little bit of a lane to come down the courthouse steps. What that means, I don't know. Whether they're going to be seeing some people. Oh, and then we are seeing an ambulance that will be coming to the scene. We don't see the ambulance yet, but it looks like they're creating a space. They're moving people away from the curb to bring a vehicle, probably an ambulance in here. Somebody may have been hurt, possibly, but we don't have that confirmed. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on here, and we'll send it back to you, Sylvia.
Okay, Dane, we'll be coming back to you in just a bit. Thanks for that. We've also just received a statement from the renowned civil defense attorney Ben Crump. You'll recall he represented Jacob Blake, whose shooting really was the starting point of the chaos in Kenosha that came to a climax on that night that Rittenhouse shot those 3 men. From the outset, he says, this case has pulled back the curtain on the profound cracks in our justice system, from the deep bias routinely and unabashedly displayed by the judge to the apathy of officers who witnessed Rittenhouse's crimes and did nothing. If we were talking about a black man, the conversation and outcome would be starkly different. Again, that is a statement that we were just given by renowned civil defense attorney Ben Crump. Let's go back to Larry. Larry, as we talked about earlier, race has definitely played a part in this. Crump is saying that if we were talking about a black man, the conversation and the outcome would have been starkly different.
Right, and if you remember what triggered all those protests, it was the death of Jacob Blake. It was not a court decision or a guilty or not guilty finding, and we say, well, why were there, hundreds or thousands of people out there in Kenosha on those nights, but so far there's only a handful at the courthouse? That often seems to be the case, that the people who can show up on a Friday night to protest, the protests are scheduled. They are announced in advance, whereas with a verdict like this, nobody knows for sure when it's going to happen. It happens in the middle of a workday on a Friday, and that often explains, we ask people later, why didn't you go out and protest? Well, I didn't know when it was going to happen, and I was an hour and a half from there. So it's not unusual for the media in a situation like this to outnumber the people who are there protesting when nobody knows the timing of the verdict or when it's going to happen, as opposed to a protest which can be scheduled.
We know the Ahmaud Arbery, we've talked about that trial is going on. What kind of impact does something like this have on another trial that's happening in conjunction at the same time that both have these racial overtones, if any impact at all?
I doubt if there's much connection between the two. I've been watching a lot of these trials on court TV, and they flip-flop between the two of them. And so people watching court TV might realize that, wow, they're both going on at the same time, and the closing arguments are going to happen Monday in the Arbery case. But I don't think the decision in Kenosha may focus more attention on what's going to happen next week in Brunswick, Georgia. But and if there's another not guilty, that will raise more questions and maybe double the number of questions and maybe double the number of protests. But as to what's actually happening in the courtroom, what happened in Kenosha today probably doesn't have much of an impact on what's going to happen there.
We touched on this a little bit before, but you talk about it doesn't have much impact on what's going on. But obviously the common denominator here is this issue of race. In your experience, when we see things like this, there's a lot of push to make change. There's a lot of protests. There's a lot of rallies. There's a lot of marches. And we're living in a country right now where there's this huge divisiveness. And you wonder how much of an impact that these verdicts have in the long run and what difference it makes in different issues such as race and gun laws and vigilantism, as in this case?
Well, I've always thought it's not the verdicts in these cases that result in changes as much as it is the case, the original shooting, an incident like Jacob Blake, Laquan McDonald. That's what leads to the change, in my opinion, not the court case that comes out of it. In the Laquan McDonald case, the city of Chicago enacted changes regarding the release of videos. Videos are released now much sooner in a high-profile case than they were before the Laquan McDonald case. Body cams are now worn by a lot more police officers than in years past because of cases like this one in Laquan McDonald. I think it's the original cases themselves that generate changes, and then the verdict is more of a judgment on what happened that night and whether or not it was justified, and almost ancillary to the original incident. And I think it's the incidents themselves that lead to change. I was talking earlier about the Sandy Point shootings and how a lot of gun control advocates are very disappointed that there was no national legislation after that to change the gun control rules, that if children getting massacred in a school can't lead to some sort of change,
right,
or Columbine, much earlier than what can be expected from cases like these where just one individual dies and then or in the Rittenhouse case where two more people are shot. There might be new rules regarding protests. Go ahead, Sylvia.
I was just going to say, we were watching live video and somebody was just put in an ambulance. Dane was telling us, we're not sure who this person was, if they were injured or what happened, if they are in any way associated with what's happening, but we did want to show that. And Joni is there right now, so in fact, let's find out from Joni what she knows. Joni?
Well, Dane was talking about a little dust-up that happened on the courthouse steps, but it appeared that woman might have had a medical situation. However, it also appeared that she fell because she had some facial injuries. They were calling for water. She was shaking. It is cold out here, but they cleared the way so that she could be put in that ambulance. She did not look like she was in good shape, and the people with her are very upset right now. Don't know how that happened, but the Kenosha police were able to clear the way to get this ambulance in here, moved her in pretty quickly, and soon it will be taking off.
Okay.
Now back to you.
Okay, thanks, Joni. We were talking to Larry about the impact, which is a great time now to transition, because the big question is, with all the protests and everything going on, what kind of impact that has had in cases like this. So we are joined now by Dr. Simone Weffer Elizondo from Northern Illinois University. Dr. Elizondo is a sociologist who specializes in protests and social movements. He's joining us now, and hopefully you can hear me. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. As I said, we were talking about the impact that these cases and the last couple of years with the civil unrest that have been going on will have on not only courts, but also our community. So Dr. Elizondo, I want to get your reaction. Isn't it interesting that there's not a very large protest right now or response around the courthouse, considering everybody's been anticipating this?
Well, I think we were all caught off guard. I know I saw the alert to expect a verdict, and then it was a handful of minutes before the verdict came out. And so I think it was very difficult for any of the social movement organizations, any of the boots on the ground, if you will, to be able to mobilize and be there. Okay, so it's not a surprise. What I suspect we will see is tonight, probably some sort of vigil there in Kenosha, Milwaukee, Chicago, something along the way of that sort of memorial event, probably today, definitely Saturday, Sunday, and then going into the Thanksgiving holiday next week. I would expect to see more buildup. And as Larry was saying, with the Aubrey case coming to a close next week, I wouldn't be surprised if
I have to interrupt you because Kyle Rittenhouse's attorney, please stand by. Kyle Rittenhouse's attorney is speaking to the media now. Let's go out there live. Please stand by.
Spence, what does your team want this verdict to be remembered for, this case to be remembered for?
You know, when I took this case, I was hired by the two first lawyers. I'm not going to use their names. They wanted to use Kyle for a cause and something that I think was inappropriate. And I don't represent causes, I represent clients. And the only thing that ended up mattering to me was whether he was found not guilty or not.
Is that what Kyle feels as well? Is that what Kyle wants, or does he?
I believe that's what he wanted. And I had, I told him when I first met him, when he was in custody, that if he was looking for somebody to go off on a crusade, I wasn't his lawyer.
Mark, throughout the week, you said, when I caught you in between court, you said,
I never talked to you.
That you were nervous, that you didn't know what the heck was going on in that jury room. Looking back on all that time waiting, nearly 27 hours to this afternoon, can you kind of walk me through sort of those range of emotions?
I mean, I expected, we kind of picked amongst ourselves, our wives, our friends, my associates in the building, and I had Tuesday at 4:30, so I was way wrong. Nobody had it going past Thursday, and there was talk today about whether they were going to deliberate on Saturday. I've never seen a jury, and I don't mean this as a slight to them, but they didn't have a lot of questions. We had no information that they ever fought. They were just working through the issues, and so it was the time that made me nervous. There wasn't any information coming out.
They submitted 5 questions over that whole time. They never asked to rewatch the videos, beyond those 5 questions. Was that concerning or puzzling question, for you?
Hey, I was afraid of a compromise. I know it's been reported that we asked for lesser includeds. We objected to all lesser includeds. Kyle was questioned on lesser includeds because he has to be, but that wasn't our wish, that wasn't Kyle's wish. And we, as time went on, were afraid that there would be some horse trading in the jury room. And that's what really concerned us.
And Mark, you were visibly frustrated with the prosecution multiple times.
No.
How would you characterize your?
I was a prosecutor. Corey was a prosecutor. And I never went after somebody like they did. And when they put on the Kandiri brothers, knowing that they were lying, that is a problem. This isn't, as I said in my closing argument, I'm not going to, it's not a game. And you're playing with an 18-year-old kid's life. And they were willing to put those guys on. Detective Howard and Detective Antaramian had both interviewed them, and in their police reports said, "We know you're lying." I can't ask that question when they're on the witness stand of the detective because one witness can't comment on another. So they put them on. They knew they were lying, and that's garbage. And I'm thankful we're never going to have to litigate the issue regarding the drone video, but they kept saying we stipulated to it. We let it in. We agreed to let it in because we saw the quality we were given and the jury couldn't see anything. And then they're saying, well, his first lawyer had it because it was on Tucker Carlson. John Pierce never had that video. We've talked to Fox News. We've talked to Tucker Carlson's show. The video that was on Tucker Carlson's show started right when Rosenbaum threw the bag. It did not start with the part that they showed at the beginning. It's a huge difference. That's what they built their whole case on with that garbage photo. And, maybe you don't expect everything in a trial, ever. And that program that they used and the expert from the crime lab specifically says on the company's blog, artificial intelligence enhancements are not to be used for forensic evidence. And they did it. And our research after it, it would have been the subject of a huge motion. We don't have to do it.
And you said going into this trial, you didn't want this to be about a cause. But in your opinion, what do you think this verdict says about the Second Amendment?
I don't know that it says, I personally don't like people carrying AR-15s around. There was so much anger and so much fear in Kenosha on August 25th that people did arm themselves. And, we knew from the beginning that if you read that statute correctly, I know everybody thought I was crazy. If you read the statute correctly, he was legal in having that firearm. And obviously, once the evidence came in, the judge threw the charge. They threw the curfew. And those were things that the state wanted to, you know, kind of hang their hat on, so they could argue he couldn't be there, he couldn't own the gun.
What was the first thing that Kyle Rittenhouse told you after?
Thank you.
Mark, the surviving victim, Gates Grosskreutz, said in an interview in recent days that watching Kyle testify, it looked like a kid who got caught doing something wrong. I'm paraphrasing. What does Kyle want the families of the two men killed to know about how this all played out? Because he repeatedly talked about feeling like he had no choice. But clearly there's
If Mr. Grosskreutz and some of the other people had let Kyle go to the police, there would only be one individual dead. They referred to him, and I talked about it, as an active shooter. Anybody can look up the definition of an active shooter from the FBI, law enforcement. He didn't meet it, but the way that those words are so charged, that's what they used. They wanted to paint him as that. You know, I wish nobody died. I wish I never met Kyle Rittenhouse. And I don't mean that because he was a bad client. I just mean because then this wouldn't have happened.
whether or not he feels he had to do it. Is he remorseful? Does he feel bad about for those families?
I think he does. We've talked about it. There's been so much talk about whether the tears were genuine. All I can say is when we prepared Kyle and we worked on his testimony, there were things we couldn't talk about in my office because it got too emotional and he couldn't handle it. He's in, counseling for PTSD, so he doesn't sleep at night. Remorse, I think, manifests itself some other ways. I don't think he can ever walk out here and say that because of the situation. But I know Kyle Rittenhouse, and I know what he feels.
Mark, along those lines, where does he go from here?
He has to get on with his life the best he can. I think eventually some anonymity will come back to it. I don't think he'll continue to live in this area. I think it's too dangerous. He's had 24-hour security since this happened. We're thankful that the judge protected his address. Everybody in this case, and when I say that, I mean prosecution, defense. To me, it's scary how many death threats we've had. I was answering my phone on the way back from court in Kenosha. My office isn't that far. After the third death threat, I quit answering the phone.
And Mark, what do you say to people who may look at this verdict and still think that he had no business being Rittenhouse not guilty? What do you say to
He had as much business being there as any of the demonstrators or the rioters. That's all I can say. I mean, there's going to be people who will never agree with that statement, but if we all would just mind our own business a little bit, I think we'd all be better off. And it's a hard lesson to learn, but
couldn't that have been said about Kyle?
It could be. He was asked to be there. He wanted to help the community, and that's the narrative that the state went with. He shouldn't have been there. He was asked to be there by Nick and Dominic, and the Kandiri brothers wanted security. And, I'm not trying to blame anyone. I wish he had never been separated from Ryan Balch, and we wouldn't be here.
Does he regret coming here to Kenosha?
I don't believe he does. If he had to do it all over again and you said same thing is going to happen and life is going to be put in a living hell for a year and you're going to not know if you're going to be a free man, he would say, I wouldn't go. But we can't undo time.
Mark, the president was just asked about the verdict. He says, I stand by what the jury has to say. The jury system works.
And I'm not laughing at President Biden. What I'm laughing at is a friend of mine who's a lawyer said, he goes, and him and I had done a big case together 7, 8 years ago. And he said, do you think this Rittenhouse is going to be bigger than that case? And I said, you know, I do. And he said, why do you say that? And I said, I've never had a case, and I don't think I ever will, where within 2 days or 3 days of one another, you know, the president and the presidential candidate comment on it. And both of them had such different beliefs. President Biden said some things that I think are so incorrect and untrue. He's not a white supremacist. I'm glad that he at least respects the jury verdict. And if the government had any information regarding his cell phone or anything, that he had been to any of those websites or been online doing that kind of stuff, it would have been introduced in evidence. It wasn't. We were the individuals who released his cell phone, which couldn't be cracked by the FBI because we had nothing to hide.
For those of us that got here a little bit late, can you just kind of reiterate or go over his reaction immediately after?
No, I'm not doing
Do you plan to
reruns.
represent him in any civil actions?
What's that?
Do you plan to represent him in civil actions?
I'm a criminal defense attorney. I don't do civil stuff.
You're a veteran criminal defense attorney. Talk about what's the one thing you learned, if you had to say the biggest takeaway from this case, what you learned.
Every case is different, and every case has surprises. You know, I learned I could wait 24 hours for a verdict.
What about what happens to the $2 million bond?
I suspect there will be a fight over that. You know, John Pierce is the person who posted the bond. All of that money was raised on behalf of Kyle. Lynn Wood and Fight Back say that they're entitled to it. There was, and when I'm using round numbers, but there was $500,000, I think, that came directly from Wendy Rittenhouse from money she had raised. So there's going to be a fight over that, and I'm just thankful that there will be a fight over that, because if he had lost, it wouldn't have mattered.
You know, Kyle had aspirations to be a first responder. Is that still?
He wants to be a nurse.
Still wants to be a nurse.
What would you say your biggest takeaway is from this 25+ hour jury deliberation? What do you think that says?
I need to be more patient.
Now that he has been acquitted, can you look back and point to a pivotal moment that was successful for you, that you think created this outcome?
Getting rid of the first 2 lawyers. And, you know, that might be a smart alecky comment, but I mean that. And I got my best friend, Corey, to join, who I trust. And to be able to work with somebody who you don't have to check their work, you don't worry about what they're going to be doing, you give them a project and it's done as good or better as you do yourself, it's priceless.
There's been a lot of commentary on the prosecutor's performance in this case. What would you say being up there with him every day?
You must have got here a little bit late. I've known Tom Binger for a long time. I knew him when he was a civil lawyer. I'm disappointed with some of the things he did, and I've said why.
Such as what?
Putting on the Kandiri brothers when you know they're lying. Changing your prosecution, going with provocation after you say that my client chased him down and shot him in the back. Calling him an active shooter when he's not. You know, justice is done when the truth is reached, and I don't know that it's set up to do that, but a prosecutor is supposed to seek the truth. It's not about winning, and this case became about winning, and that's probably why it got so personal.
How about the judge? What do you say about how the judge handled the case?
You know, I've never seen so much made of so little, and that's not to pick on you guys or anything like that, but I've tried cases as a prosecutor 100 years ago in front of Judge Schrader. I've tried cases as a defense lawyer, and him and I butted heads as a defense lawyer. Judge Schrader gives you a fair trial as a defendant. You don't want him to sentence your client, okay? But in this case, we were looking for a fair trial, and if we lost, we knew what was going to happen. So it wouldn't have mattered whether it was that judge or some other judge. He's getting life in prison. So I'd rather have a fair trial. I thought he gave us a fair trial. You know, everybody got all crazy about the tumbler. Who cares? That has nothing to do with this. I mean, I've seen the tumbler used before. I've seen clerks pull things out and suspicious things happen. Kyle pulled it out. And I'll be real honest, we had every juror scored on a sheet, and we were devastated when those 3 of the 6 jurors were separated from the panel because we thought they were 3 of our strongest jurors, and Kyle pulled their names. So I think it's a good system. You know, I've got a trial in front of him, you know, a big case, and maybe in that one I'll think he's unfair, but he's a fair judge.
He also said something about, like, in the future he plans on rethinking the possibility of live coverage to this extent. Given what you guys have gone through, you know, he mentioned that you guys went through a lot, there were threats made to you. What do you think that should be going forward, setting a precedent about?
I don't know about that. You know, I think that I've never done a case that was televised gavel to gavel. I've had cases that have gotten media coverage. I was kind of, I knew this case was big. I had no idea it was going to be this big. I mean, I've gotten calls from people I haven't seen in 25 years. It's just bizarre. And I'll never be able to figure out exactly what it is that caused the interest that it did. I don't think it made the attorneys act different. I don't think it made the judge act different. I suspect when everything cools down, if there was another big case in front of Judge Schrader, he'd let the cameras in.
Mark, will Kyle say anything to the crowd that's gathering down there now, or will you on his behalf? We don't know that there'll be trouble, but you know, there's people gathering. By the time we left, there were more and more people showing up. Do you think anything he might say could make things go better than before?
I don't. The people who are going to end up causing trouble, they don't want to hear from Kyle Rittenhouse. It's, you know, what, remain calm?
What do you think the wider implications of this verdict are, if any?
I don't think it's that kind of case. I mean, you know, when you want to talk about implications and precedent and things like that, is it ever going to happen again? You know, is there ever going to be just a total unrest in Kenosha or some other city, and that's going to happen? You know, I just don't see that. It was a case about self-defense, the right to protect oneself from, you know, Mr. Rosenbaum. Don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he wasn't a nice person, and everybody knows why. And a lot of that didn't come in front of the jury. So I don't know that there's any broader implications. I don't want to make it bigger than it is.
A couple politicians in Wisconsin used the word vigilante to refer to your client since the verdict came down. How do you react to that?
Maybe they should have watched the trial. Yeah.
I know Kyle Rittenhouse said thank you to you. You said that after the verdict was read. Can you share any more about general reaction from him or his family in that moment?
You know, it's one of those things that anything that's said at this time is kind of meaningless. We have to take it in, reflect on it, and you know, what's he thanking me for? And I don't mean that it's insincere, but it takes a while to process what happened today. I haven't processed it.
Will he and his family stay in Wisconsin?
I don't think I can't answer that question. If I had to guess, and it would be a guess, I don't think they'll stay in Wisconsin.
What's next for you?
I got a trial in a week. I'm going to take a couple of days off and go to the Badger game tomorrow, which I've missed.
Jump around?
Hopefully. I've missed a couple of Badger games because of this trial, and I'm very much, we were afraid we weren't going to get to go because they were going to have them deliberate on Saturday, and I want to see them beat Nebraska.
Do you have any sense that they agreed to those verdicts much earlier, but maybe just took some extra time to at least leave the impression they really thought through it, and it wasn't a quick, sudden decision?
I don't believe that. Yeah, I don't believe that. I mean, there was the questions, and I think I said this to some people yesterday when they asked to call off at 4 o'clock. You could see the tenseness in those people, the jurors, at least I could, or I sensed it, who were entering that room. And, you know, if they wanted to quit early because I think they were tense. And if there was some early verdict and they were playing all of us for fools, they're great actors and actresses. I don't think that was the case.
What do you think about the amount of time?
I believe so. I have clients from 30 years ago I still talk to. I get one of my oldest favorite clients. He moved out of Racine, moved to Minneapolis. He texted me congratulations. I talk to him once a month. I try to stay in touch with clients who want to stay in touch with me. I like to see him do well, and I hope that Kyle does.
Do you think that they'll keep a low profile?
I hope so.
What do you think the amount of time that the jury took to do this says about how they handled it?
They took it very seriously. As I said, it's the longest jury I've ever had out. Wow. Can I go home?
Go home. Anything else we haven't asked you?
Mark, do you think he'll ever talk?
So we have been listening to Kyle Rittenhouse's attorney, Mark Richards. He had a lot to say, but let me just give you the highlights basically. Probably the more interesting thing is that he says that Rittenhouse has been suffering from PTSD. He has had 24-hour security as a result of this trial. There have been death threats. He himself said he received 3 just coming in today. He had to stop answering his phone. He also talked about how he was worried that the jury was going to come to a compromise, which was why it took them so long to come to this verdict. He had predicted that the verdict would be in by Tuesday. The judge had given a jury a set of rules, basically saying that there were some other options that they could look at, including finding him guilty of, to a lesser degree, of some other things. But again, interesting that came out of this. He also talked about how Rittenhouse was crying, and a lot of people wondered whether, in fact, those were real tears, but saying that Rittenhouse will no longer be living in that area. It's time for him to become anonymous, and that we probably would not be seeing him anytime soon. Larry, you've been standing by listening to all of this. What did you think of Mark Richards' comments?
Well, what a shock, Sylvia. The defense lawyer who just won the biggest case of his life says the judge gave him a fair trial. It was very interesting. I thought the way that he was chosen to represent Rittenhouse was very interesting. When he said, if you want somebody who's going to take up a cause, then I'm not your guy. If you want somebody who's going to defend you and help win your case, then I'm your guy. And that's the one who Rittenhouse chose, and I think Rittenhouse would be very happy with that choice today. I thought Richard's defense of the judge was very interesting. He said he's tried a lot of cases in front of the judge. He said he's the type of judge who will give your defendant a fair trial, but you don't want him to be the sentencing judge. So he was obviously worried that if this case had gone against Rittenhouse, if the jury had gone against Rittenhouse, that there was going to be a very tough sentence from the judge. And I didn't hear all the questions, but I was curious as to, a lot of times lawyers are given access to the jury afterwards as to interview them and get their thoughts and what did we do right and what did we not do so well. And I didn't hear that he had the chance to talk to any of the jurors. I would have been interested in his thoughts about that.
Yeah, we were still waiting. We were still waiting to hear about that. Interesting, Larry, too, it sounds like there's going to be a continued fight. I don't know if you heard him talk about this, that there was money raised for Rittenhouse, in fact, $2 million bond. He said that he expects that there is going to be an issue with this because there are people who are arguing over who should get that money. How does that usually work?
You know, I'm not familiar with that issue, and I know there was money raised, and I'm not sure what happens when a bunch of people on the internet, for example, have gathered together behind a cause and given $500,000 or $1 million to a group. But I would imagine the group that organized the fundraising would get most of the money back. And he said about $500,000 came from a group that Rittenhouse's mother was involved with. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I've never seen that play out in Chicago. For one reason, the defendants are usually not found not guilty in Chicago courtrooms. This is kind of an unusual case.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Early on, there was a lot of criticism because there was that GoFundMe page that was started to raise money. Stand by, Larry. I want to read this statement that we just got. It's a statement from the Kenosha County District Attorney Michael Gravely. He says, "We respect the jury verdict based on 3.5 days of careful deliberations. Certainly, issues regarding the privilege of self-defense remain highly contentious in our current times. We ask that all members of the public accept the verdicts peacefully and not resort to violence. Again, that's a statement that was just released from the Kenosha County DA. Interesting, too, to go back and talk about, Larry, a little more about what Richards had to say. He said that he felt like, I don't know if you heard this part, that he felt like the prosecution came too strong against Rittenhouse, that they were playing with the life of an 18-year-old kid. He felt like, he said that they put people who didn't tell the truth on the witness stand, and that he himself has actually prosecuted cases, and he thought they went too far with this.
Yeah, he said that they crossed the line. He said that justice is supposed to be about uncovering the truth, and that's what prosecutors should be doing. And he said instead, this case became all about winning. And I think that's not unusual for a case that has the entire nation watching. There's a lot more pressure. And plus, every move gets analyzed, 100 times over, because these cases are televised. And you've got legal analysts like me sitting there second guessing the prosecution and often the defense lawyers as to their moves. A lot of people were very critical of putting Rittenhouse on the witness stand. And that appears to have paid off handsomely for Rittenhouse in this case. And, a lot of the discussion were the tears that Rittenhouse showed. Were they real or were they phony? And he said, look, if you were behind the scenes, you knew that it was an emotional issue for him, and he was not faking it when he was on the witness stand. It's interesting, the jury can't learn things like that. All they see is what's in front of them in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. And you have no idea that the defendant might be suffering from PTSD or emotional problems in dealing with what happened. The jury doesn't learn about things like that, but apparently they believe the tears were real and found him not guilty.
Yeah, so we are still waiting with our crews there at the courthouse to see if maybe the defense attorneys will come out. But we want to go back, because I think this is a good time, to Simon Weffer Elizondo. He is an NIU sociology professor. Thank you for standing by, and I know we've had you there for a while. Obviously an important day here. The district attorney just making that statement saying, we ask that all members of the public accept the verdicts peacefully and not resort to violence. You specialize in the social impact of protest. What do you expect we're going to see as a result of this?
Well, I think in terms of immediate actions, we'll see some candlelight vigils in places like Milwaukee, Chicago, Kenosha, for the victims of Rittenhouse, of Jacob Blake, of the initial incident. And hopefully those all go off peacefully. I think there is a larger question about what happens in terms of protest moving forward, and the idea of people bringing weapons to protests, whether in support of a protest or in opposition to. Mm-hmm. I know Larry had said that he doesn't think court cases matter and these sorts of things, but in 1980 in Greensboro, there's a very influential case in terms of the Klan, and I'm not equating Rittenhouse to the Klan, don't get me wrong, but where they brought weapons, they shot people, they pretty much got off unscathed. And for quite a while there in the early 80s, anytime there was mobilization and protest around issues of race in places like North Carolina, those opposed to racial justice came out with weapons. And, that has an effect on people's willingness to go out and voice their First Amendment rights to protest around an issue if they have to worry about their own safety. Because someone opposite them might have a weapon. So I think there will be some more effects in that case, in that sense. Mm-hmm. But that remains to be seen.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. One of the people that Joni or Dane were interviewing earlier was saying that Kyle Rittenhouse stepped in where law enforcement had not, and that Rittenhouse was asked to be out there bringing his rifle with him. You have to wonder if people sit back and watch and see what happened there, if that might have an impact, even some influence on what they might decide to do in the future when other things like this happen. We're waiting for the Ahmaud Arbery verdict to come in. Obviously, that one's probably going to be a lot different, but even still, how does one series of events lead to another? In this case, with this protests that are going to be taking place versus what we might see later at other cases. Are more people going to decide to go out there and do their own thing?
I think that's a definite possibility. Now, that wasn't the jury's job, was to determine what the overall social impacts were going to be in terms of people going out and protesting and people countering those protests. But I mean, given the protests that we've seen here in Chicago in the past 18 to 24 months, it's not out of the realm of possibility to say that if there was a protest around the Ahmaud Arbery verdict, whichever way it goes, that those that disagree with the verdict could be out there protesting with weapons. And then what does that mean for law enforcement? How do they handle the protests? I mean, we've seen the ACLU objecting to how Chicago police have reacted to protests. What would happen and what sort of position would Chicago Police Department be in if both sides were armed? We don't see that very often in social movements and protests. And I'm not predicting that that is going to happen, but I think it increases the possibility of people saying, well, you know, this happened in Kenosha. Kenosha is just a stone's throw away. I head up there to the outlets all the time. Why don't I go ahead and bring a weapon? Because I'm worried, because I don't know what someone else on the other side is going to do.
Yeah, you know, this is a busy weekend in Chicago. Larry and I were talking about this earlier. This is the kickoff weekend to the holidays. We've got tree lighting ceremony tonight. We have the magnificent lights parade tomorrow. There's so much going on, and there has to be some concern. The city obviously has been planning ahead and making sure that we have the security that we need. But as far as protests go, would that encourage more people to even come out, because we are kind of in the middle of having high-profile situations going on right now?
It might. It might. It's always hard to tell. You know, to be honest, we see more protests seasonally in spring and summer. Not many of us like to be outside protesting when it's 31 degrees and the wind is whipping off the lake. Now, that's not to say it hasn't happened in the past. That will naturally decrease the size of protests. But, you know, there could also be fatigue from constant mobilization around issues of racial justice, issues around policing. You know, in the past 2 years, add on to that COVID. It's hard to predict really what the size of protests will be, but I suspect initially they will be, you know, peaceful vigils, asking people to reflect on what happened and what's going on in terms of social justice issues in the United States.
Okay, Dr. Simone Weffer-Elizondo from Northern Illinois University, thanks so much for joining us and giving us your perspective on this. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
As we continue to look at the live picture from outside the courthouse, you see a lot of reporters, photographers out there trying to get as many interviews as they can. Let's go back out to Larry, who has been standing by and with us throughout this case. And if you're just joining us, obviously we are still on the air because of the fact that that Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all 5 counts. Larry, I know you said you don't like to play armchair quarterback as we look back, but there will be a lot of people doing that, and I'm sure the defense will probably do that themselves. You know, if you think about what could have been done differently, what do you think might be going through their mind right now as they sit back and see how the final verdict came in?
Well, I assume you're asking about the prosecution, since they lost here, and what could they have done differently. As I watched the case, and I've seen murder cases in Cook County where the prosecutors they make it a point to treat the defendant sitting at the defense table like a murderer. One of the rules they have is that you always point during your opening statements, you always point at that individual. You stand right over him, you point and say, this guy killed somebody, or this woman killed somebody. And I don't think that they really, even though that intentional homicide or murder was one of the charges here, I don't think they, and maybe it's because of Rittenhouse's age, but based on what I saw, and I watched the opening statements and much of the trial and the closings, I don't really think they treated him like the murderer that they had charged him to be. And I think that also went for their cross-examination. One of the rules we used to learn in cross-examination was in the first 5 minutes of what might be 3 hours of questioning, when you cross-examine somebody, you grab them by the throat and choke them during the first 5 minutes and let them know that you're in control and that you're going to give him a rough time throughout, and you let the jury know that the person is a liar and a killer. I think possibly, maybe because of Rittenhouse's age and because of his appearance, maybe they didn't go hard enough on him during that cross-examination, and during the entire case, did they really label him as a killer? And that's what he was charged with. That's what he was charged with. Also, they might have overcharged him at the outset and left the jury with the impression that, God, they charged this guy as a first-degree murderer, and there's no way he's a first-degree murderer, so what else has the prosecution done wrong in this case?
Right.
And the defense alleged that all along. The defense said he is not he was overcharged because of the political pressure in the days after the shooting, that he was labeled a white supremacist, not by the prosecutors, but by many people talking about the case on TV. And he was charged too quickly and too heavily. That's what the defense said. There was a rush to judgment. So maybe they overcharged him, and then maybe they went too easy on him during the cross-examination.
Okay.
That would be my thoughts.
Okay, Larry, stand by again. We want to go back out to the courthouse. Dane Placco is out there. Dane, what can you tell us about what's happening?
Yeah, the crowd has thinned considerably since the last time we talked to you about a half hour ago. Step out of the way, we'll show you the front steps of the Kenosha County Courthouse right now. There's a group of people around some of the protesters. There was a little skirmish that broke out a couple moments ago, two people yelling at each other. One woman kind of pushed a gentleman. Some signs were thrown, and there were a couple police officers that went in there to break it up. Right now, you see just kind of a perimeter of onlookers and media shooting them as they continue to talk. But the vast majority of the people who were out here earlier, the Rittenhouse supporters and the Rittenhouse protesters, have now left the courthouse area, and the streets again reopened. When we talked to you about a half hour ago, we showed you that the 6th Street right here in front of the courthouse had been shut down. That was to bring an ambulance in. There was a woman who was behaving somewhat erratically, screaming, and then she laid down on the ground and began having what appeared to be a seizure. They brought an ambulance and put her on a stretcher and took her away. After that, they reopened the street again. We're seeing no signs of any of the streets around here being closed. We know that there are National Guardsmen in the area on the perimeter of Kenosha right now, 500 we're told, but they have not been called into the scene. But again, we're only just a couple blocks from downtown Kenosha, the business district. We've not had an opportunity to walk over there yet to see if those businesses are still open. When we talked to business owners earlier in the week, they were indicating that they were going to shut their doors once the verdict came down. We'll check on that a little bit later. That's the scene here in front of the courthouse right now. Again, crowd down considerably from what it was before. We've not seen any of the players involved in the trial itself coming out through the front entrance, and there are a lot of police in the area, not particularly visible here right now, but they're in the perimeter, just kind of keeping an eye on things, and we'll step in if needed. Throw it back to you, Sylvia.
Okay, Dane, I apologize if you might have touched on this, but what have you heard about if Rittenhouse is in fact in the courtroom, because not in the courtroom, but still in the building, because there are reports that he is not, and do you expect to be able to speak to the defense attorneys?
Yeah, we really are getting no information about that out here. There is a media room in the basement of the courthouse where there is some of that information being passed along. Don't know if Rittenhouse is still here. I would assume that we are not going to see him when he leaves, but there will be very tight security around him. Likely that he has already left. We know that the jurors have already been brought out of the building. They were put on a bus and taken out the back way. This is a fairly large complex. It's an old courthouse building itself, but the back end of it is new. It's modern, and there's a large parking garage attached to it and a sally port. So if they want to move people out without being seen, there is a way to do that.
Okay, Dane, I know you're going to be staying out there until we basically have exhausted all possibilities of talking to anybody else. We appreciate that. We'll let you get back to work. Let's go back out to Larry. Larry, just your thoughts on all of this and how this has come with the 5 not guilty counts.
Well, let's start with the length of time it took. When they started deliberating earlier this week, I guessed that it would take them several days. because they were going to go through the counts very carefully. So the fact that it took 3.5 days, I don't find surprising. These were 3 different incidents. They had to deal with Rittenhouse's shooting Rosenbaum, Anthony Huber, and Grosskreutz. Those are 3 different crime scenes, 3 different selections of video, and lots of testimony about each of those incidents. So even though some people, even the defense lawyer said he'd never had a case go more than 24 hours or more than a day with a jury, this one included, 27 hours of deliberations,
Right.
but that did not surprise me. There was talk at one point that it might be a hung jury. A lot of people were wondering if they were stuck, and I'm still curious as to whether or not they took an initial vote and it came out 8-4, 10-2, and then it was a matter of convincing a couple of jurors, or did it start out 6-6 and they had some very heated discussions in there? And we won't know that until we hear from the jury foreman or some of the jurors decide to talk. And as to the verdicts of not guilty, I think it shows that the defense took a risk putting Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand. Even if they had rehearsed with him and prepared him in every way, all defense lawyers would say it's very risky, especially when you feel like you're winning the case, which they did. It's very risky to put the defendant on the stand, but it makes a lot of sense when self-defense is, in fact, the defense that's being put forward. And they took that risk. As I said, I think Rittenhouse performed well. I thought he came across as credible. I think the prosecution didn't come down hard enough on him, and that was the turning point in the trial.
Yeah, let's go back to what some of the things that Rittenhouse's attorney Richards had said, because you've touched on this just a little bit. He was saying that he was nervous that the deliberations took 27 hours, that he's never seen a jury that didn't have a lot of questions that took this long in making a decision. He said the timing made him nervous, especially because they only submitted 5 questions. Again, he was worried that there was going to be some sort of a compromise, a lesser verdict, a lesser conviction that would be brought. And that made him very nervous. And interesting, he's been doing this for a long time. A veteran attorney saying that his guess was the verdict was going to come down Tuesday at 4:30, and as they were all laying bets, no one had it going past Thursday. Here we are on Friday, Friday before the weekend, which just goes to show you, and you're somebody who's also done this for a while, is you can't ever guess what's going on behind closed doors, can you?
Right, although I did say yesterday at 4 o'clock, Sylvia, I pointed out that a lot of juries who have deliberated for some time do not like to go into the weekend.
Yeah.
In my career, I've seen a lot of juries come down at 4. I think I said 3:30 or 4 on Friday afternoon, so I missed it by 3 hours yesterday. But and the other factor I said is that if the food is really awful in the courthouse, then you often get a quicker jury verdict. So maybe they have really good food in the Kenosha courthouse.
Wow.
But I think this was a case, and the defense attorney Mark Richards said he had never seen a case. He never thought this would get as big as it did.
Right.
And I think the jurors, when they could hear what was going on outside, they live in the Kenosha area. They know what happened back in August on the 24th and 25th of 2020. They knew this was a case that was being watched nationwide. So maybe that adds another day or two to their deliberations. They have to go home tonight and face eventually their neighbors and say, yeah, I was on the jury, and a couple of the neighbors are going to say, wow, I think you really got it wrong. And they need to be able to defend their positions to their family, to their friends, to those they socialize with.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? You go through every point and you make sure you feel comfortable with the decision. And that way you can defend your decision as you're called upon to later on in life. So maybe that adds another day or two also, the fact that the whole country is watching and that they have to live with it for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Okay, Larry Allen, we always appreciate your perspective. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. Always good to see you. As we look at the live picture from the courthouse in Kenosha, you can see the crowd definitely thinning out again. Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty on all counts. There is still a lot to be had here as far as the story. As far as we know, he is on his way to wherever that might be. We're going to have much more on this coming up on our news at 4, 5, and 9, extended coverage. So please stay tuned. Until then, I'm Sylvia Perez. Thanks for joining me.